I think that an example of this is the case of PV solar distributed generation. For example, all these new smart energy networks that are in place require more details on the way to integrate the excess power that is produced by, say, this distributed generation. So, for example, the actual access that there is to the network of the incumbent utility in the distribution grid is one policy that is really needed to achieve this integration of excess power. I will also say that the way of charging the use of the actual network of the distribution utility is also very important to decide at the policy level. And of course, the actual way to measure and to charge for the excess power through, say, various policies such as net metering and net billing. These are only examples of smart policies that would be needed to go together with the development of smart grids. I think we can, again, going to specific cases and exemplify the type of benefits. Going back to distributed generation projects, I would think that, for example, the case of residential users that are installing solar panels, PV solar panels in their houses, in their rooftops, this provides various benefits for the system. For example, the case of Mexico. In Mexico, 25% of total electricity demand comes from residential users. So one can imagine if there is like a massive change to the use of solar panels in Mexico, that would reduce the demand for electricity, and that would help the local utility to concentrate its efforts in producing or generating electricity with the most efficient generation. So that would have benefits in economic terms. And likewise, these residential sector users, they of course have these emissions that are not small ones. They really contribute with around 9% of the total emissions that are due to electricity generation. So we can see that incorporating all these type of consumers from distributed generation PV solar panels then would have various benefits, such as environmental, economical, as well as reducing the burden for the government in terms of potential subsidization. So those are examples of benefits that would come from this process. Likewise, thinking about wider projects such as, say, larger renewable generation facilities, for example, auctions for solar or wind generation, the integration of this power into the system through smart grids would also provide many benefits in terms of reducing emissions as well as in economic terms. In Mexico, in the last auctions for renewable energy, we have been obtaining really low prices for solar energy, for example, less than $20 per megawatt hour. And that's really interesting for the final bill that is paid by consumers. Well, I would like to concentrate in two changes that I think are really important. The first one is concerned with the timing of building of new network capacity that is needed to integrate the energy that is produced mainly through renewable energy sources. So the problem is that the building of a new network takes more time than the emergence of new generation. And there are many cases where the response of the building of the new capacity is not really there when it is needed. So that's one first change that we need to think about, how to make incentives and how to have a framework to allow for a faster building of new capacity that can integrate the new capacity that is emerging, especially in the renewable sector. And the second change that I would think that we need to think about is the way to combine various regulatory mechanisms to allow for the efficient development of networks. One example is on how to combine the way of planning the expansion of the network that is compatible with system operation. This in some countries would sound as trivial, but there are other countries that make a separation between the two. And for example, in Germany, they have not been able to construct the capacity that is needed to bring the wind generation that is produced in the north to the south. And even though they have built new capacity, but it has not been built where it is needed to really bring the amount of generation that is produced in the north to the south. Another example is likewise how to combine the planning of the expansion of the network with incentives. So in many countries, what they have decided to do is just to have kind of government planning of expansion of the network, and then just use cost-based tarification or pricing for transmission. But they forget about incentives for future efficiency, either in terms of further capacity increase or even in terms of maintenance costs. So I don't think that going for planning is like forgetting about using incentives. I think they can be combined and they can come together to have a way to promote the efficient expansion of the network. Yeah, I would say that not only Latin America or Mexico can learn from the European Union policies, but all the world, because there are various cases of countries that are pioneers in developing renewable energy sources and smart grids and all this process through a decarbonized world. And then, yes, we can all learn from European Union policies, but thinking about more on Latin America and Mexico, I would say that we at least shouldn't do the same mistakes that have been done here due to the pioneers. Probably they go first, but they make first mistakes, right? So I think that we should avoid doing kind of mistakes such as the way to price carbon. So we have seen in Europe that the way the initial allocation of certificates, clean certificates, was done in a way that the future investment in technologies or projects that are friendly in terms of carbon, carbon-free projects are not so attractive due to the too low price of carbon. So we have to learn from that, especially in Mexico. We're implementing a new market on emissions, and we should be careful about not doing the same thing. Another example would be the way to subsidize new renewable technologies. We have seen that, for example, in the case of Germany, they have used this feed-in tariff policy that, yes, it promoted the use of and the production of renewable energy, but at the same time, that was at a very high cost to consumers. And in Latin America, we have been using more auctions to bring renewable projects in various technologies, and with very good results in terms of prices. So I would say that in that case, I know that Germany is going from the feed-in tariff policy to an auction policy. So it's the other way around. And lastly, the way to expand networks. I think there are also examples, as I mentioned in the case of Germany, that is clearly something that we wouldn't like to do in Latin America.